So Friday's Read Aloud is going to be taped because unfortunately I have to go to the dentist tomorrow. And here I am sitting in the meeting room in front of one of my favorite pieces of art in the library, and it's a picture, a blown up photograph turned into a mural of a space inside the Connect building, which is the original library next door, and this was taken in 1930. And it's got a circ desk, it's got chairs, it's got books, just like we have now at SOPL, which if you look on the website, www.sopl.org, you'll see that we have extended our hours. We're going to be open a lot more, and we miss everybody, and we want everybody to start coming on in and take books out and talk to us, say hello, and catch up. So today, the Read Aloud is from Jon Scieszka. Has put together several volumes of short stories, and this one is called True Stories, and each short story is written by a different young YA author or children's author. And this one is by Candace Fleming, and it's about Jumbo, who was a really big elephant. Here he is. Here's a picture of Jumbo. There he is. Okay. This is a true story. On a warm September night in 1885, the usually quiet town of St. Thomas, Ontario, Canada, teemed with people. Folks had come from miles around by streetcar and carriage, and on horseback and on foot to see the Barnum, Bailey, and Hutchinson circus. For days now, every fence, tree, lamppost, and barn door had been plastered with brightly colored posters promising wondrous sights. Jojo, the dog-faced boy, the Roman hippodrome of glorious races, Nubian warriors, the bearded lady, clowns, trapeze artists, Mademoiselle Zara, the tightrope walker, Hagenbeck's man-eating cats of Africa, Cinderella's fairy chariot, and more. Despite these marvels, top billing went to the circus's biggest star, Jumbo. He is the biggest elephant in or out of captivity, glared the posters, a towering monarch of his mighty race, prodigious mountain, dazzling Jumbo. Those swarming to the circus that night buzzed with excitement about the elephant. He's all I want to see, admitted one circus goer. He's the reason I'm here, confessed another. Oh, begged a third, let me see Jumbo. Just hours earlier, circus workers had erected a great city of tents, 326,000 yards of canvas on an empty lot near the edge of town. Now, as the crowds drew near, they heard the wheezing tune of a steam calliope. Lions roared, elephants trumpeted. The smell of sawdust mingled with the scent of animal manure and roasted peanuts. Step up, called the ticket seller, and people did. Reaching into their pockets, they dug out the 50-cent admission. Then, tickets in hand, they wandered the midway before the performance. Many headed to the menagerie tent, where the circus animals waited for their moment in the spotlight. Big cats and bears lounged in cages, recalled one visitor. Llamas and giraffes fidgeted nearby. An elephant dipped its trunk into a trough of water. Was that Jumbo? Oh, the animal keeper laughed. Once you've seen our mighty behemoth, you will never again mistake these puny elephants for him. Jumbo is a gargantuan. Leaving the menagerie, some visitors browsed the souvenir booth. Here, they could choose from a vast assortment of mementos, circus programs, postcards, rubber clown noses, but the most popular items were all Jumbo-shaped. Mugs, thimbles, paperweights, and coin bags. Everyone wanted a remembrance of Jumbo, recalled souvenir peddler. While some shopped, others moved toward the sideshow tent. Digging another dime from their pockets, they pushed back the tent's flap and stepped into the shadowy darkness. Here on the wooden stage performed some of the Barnum and Bailey's most famous sideshow acts. Captain George Consensus, who was covered head to toe with tattoos, 388 in all. Lucia Zarate, a tiny woman, standing just 20 inches tall and weighing a mere 5 pounds. And English Jack, who made onlookers gasp and gag by gulping down a wiggling meal of live frogs. Let me tell you that once he got backstage, he regurgitated the frogs that were, according to all accounts, stunned but not hurt. It was fine entertainment. But when are we going to see Jumbo? Begged the little girl. At last, the lively strains of a brass band were heard coming from the main tent. This was the signal that the show was about to start. Following the crush, visitors found their seats beneath the big top. They leaned forward expectantly. At exactly 8 o'clock, the time when all evening performances began, there came another blast from the band. The tent lights snapped off. A spotlight snapped on. The ringmaster stepped into the center ring and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, children of all ages, meet the most remarkable performers in the universe." Then, prancing horses, tumbling clowns, bejeweled camels, elephants swayed to and fro, men and women in tights and spangles of shining gold and steel paraded around and round in a heart-pounding display of pageantry, recalled one circus goer. The magical beauty of it all brought tears to my eyes. But the audience still had not seen the circus' biggest star. Where was Jumbo? The elephant that would become a star was born somewhere in the foothills of the Sudan, snatched by his mother in 1861 by a tribe of hunters. The baby elephant was sold to a so-called animal collector, who in turn sold him to a zoo in Paris, France. Keepers there had dreamed of building an exhibit around an African elephant. While many zoos included Asian elephants as part of their exhibits, African elephants were a rarity. Only 2 existed on the entire European continent, and none could be found in the United States. Such an unusual creature, Paris zookeepers believed, would bring large crowds to their park. But the baby elephant was a disappointment. He was small for his age and sickly. He spent most of his time cowering in the stables. "This elephant is nothing but a malnourished runt," declared the superintendent. Frustrated, the zoo's officials gave up their dream. In June 1865, they approached the Royal Zoological Gardens in London. Would they like to own a young African elephant? London officials leaped at the chance. They quickly agreed to trade 1 rhinoceros, 2 dingoes, a black-backed jackal, a pair of wedge-tailed eagles, a possum, and a kangaroo. All of that in exchange for the 4-year-old elephant. They made this deal without seeing Jumbo first. Just 2 weeks later, on a cloudy morning in late June, a short, muscular man sporting a bushy mustache and a tight-fitting bowler hat stepped off the train at a French railway station. A representative from the Paris Zoo asked if he was Monsieur Scott. The man in the bowler hat said yes, and then he added, "I have come for the elephant." He was an assistant keeper at the London Zoo. Matthew Scott had been given the job of accompanying the elephant to his new home. Chosen because of his gentleness and empathy, Scott was obsessively devoted to the animals in his care. He spent long hours day and night petting and talking to them. Because his animals came first, Scott had no family and few friends. "If I had not sacrificed a little comfort," he said, "and taken the trouble to care for them to my best and constant ability, they would not have had confidence in me, nor would I have learned their ways. It is a fact that you cannot love or have affection of any animal without attending diligently to its wants." This close, constant contact with the animals gave Scott an insight into their behavior that other keepers lacked. "He claimed he could talk to the animals," said one zoo official. "Ridiculous, of course." though he did have an uncanny ability to figure out what ailed a creature. It didn't take much to see what ailed the little bull elephant that the Paris representative now handed over. Oh, he was bone thin and filthy, and the animal limped painfully because his toenails had been allowed to grow too long. Sores covered his skin, and pus oozed from the corner of his infected eyes. "I've never seen a creature so woebegone," said Scott. A wave of pity swept over him. Right then and there, he vowed to make things right for the elephant. I undertook to be his doctor, his nurse, and his general servant. Keeper and elephant took a train to the French coast, then a boat across the English Channel, and another train to Waterloo Station. Then together, they walked through the streets of London to the zoo, the little elephant hobbling along on his sore feet. History does not record what citizens thought of the animal, but at just 5 feet tall and 400 pounds, the skinny, miserable creature was hardly a majestic sight. Scott, however, already doted on his charge. After arriving at the zoo, he tucked the animal into a comfortable, clean bed in the newly built elephant stable. The scared little animal did not sleep alone. Bedded down nearby was his keeper and his new best friend, Matthew Scott. "His trunk broke from my hand," recalled Scott, "until, under a spell of warmth and companionship, we slept." While the two settled in, zoo officials pondered what to name their new elephant. They eventually decided on Jumbo, although no one knows why. Jumbo is not a word in the English language at that time. Most historians think it came from mumbo jumbo, which was a West African term that had been adopted by the English, meaning superstitious nonsense. For the next several months, Scott nursed Jumbo back to health, refusing to leave his side for more than a few minutes. "I watched him day and night," said Scott, "with all the care and affection of a mother. I took all the infection from his almost blinded eyes. I healed his scabs as cleanly as a man who takes off an overcoat, and his skin was as fine as that of a horse just from the clippers after the hair had been cut off." He scraped Jumbo's rotten feet to return them to their normal shape. He coddled him. He scratched him behind his ears. He led him down to the River Thames to play. Sucking up the water into his trunk, the elephant would playfully shoot it at his keeper. "I got all the showers," said Scott, without the ability to return the kindness. "I couldn't do more than splash a bit or throw a few buckets of water on his back." As his health returned, so did his appetite. And guess what he would eat in a day? 200 pounds of hay, 3 quarts of onions, 2 quarts of biscuits, 50 loaves of bread, 2 barrels of oats, a barrel of potatoes, dozens of apples, oranges, figs, nutcakes, buns. And he topped off the feast with 5 buckets of water and a bottle of fine Irish whiskey that Jumbo guzzled down in a single gulp. "Say what you will," said one zoo employee, "that elephant has fine taste." Under Scott's loving care, the once puny elephant grew and grew and grew. By 1881, he weighed 7 tons and stood 12 feet tall. And he was utterly devoted to his keeper, Scott. Following him around like a puppy, Jumbo would grow irritable and restless if he lost sight of him for more than a few minutes. "He's a big baby," his keeper once admitted. "If I'm late, he cries and whines and becomes very naughty, just as the same as a child crying after its mother. The elephant refused to obey anyone else. He will do anything I ask him. We're one. Woe to anybody who tries to come between us." He became the most popular attraction at the zoo. A gentle animal, he happily swung his trunk as he sauntered through the shaded garden or playfully squirted water at the crowds who gathered at his specially built pool to watch him drink. They tossed him his favorite treats, buns and oranges, and they marveled at his size. One person who was especially impressed was Phineas Taylor Barnum, the flamboyant American showman. For decades, Barnum had been entertaining the public with his skeleton collections and wax museums, his sword swallowers, his fake mermaids. The showman visited Jumbo whenever business took him to London. I often looked wistfully at him, but no hope of ever getting possession. I did not suppose he would ever be sold. In 1881, Barnum merged his show with Bailey and Hutchinson. Together they created the greatest show on earth, a huge traveling circus, larger than any that had come before. Problem was, they felt they needed a fresh, astonishing exhibit to attract customers. So they sent their agents scurrying across Europe and America. Months later, one of the agents returned to the headquarters in New York. Find anything over there? James Bailey asked him. Nope, said Warner. Bailey persisted. What's the biggest thing you saw over there? Biggest thing I ever saw was an elephant in the London Zoo. Barnum looked up. Jumbo? Warner nodded. How big? Asked Bailey. Using his umbrella, Warner stretched to touch a spot high up on the office wall, about so high. Are you sure? Get a step ladder and measure that. The measurement stunned Bailey. They made him the biggest elephant in the world. I will pay a fortune for Jumbo if you could get him. But I doubt it. The elephant is as popular as the Queen. Let's try to get him anyway, said Bailey. The same afternoon, they telegraphed the zoo officials with an offer of $10,000. Incredibly, the zoo officials agreed. Despite his gentle behavior, sometimes the men in charge worried about his temperament. Suppose he became aggressive. What if he went wild? An elephant his size could cause catastrophic destruction. Better safe than sorry. Let America have him. In February, the agents came to escort the elephant to America. The plan was to coax Jumbo into a huge packing crate, mounted on wheels and fortified with massive iron bands. The crate had sections that were left open so that Jumbo could look out and swing his trunk. Once the elephant was secured inside, a team of strong horses would pull the crate on the docks where the ship waited to sail to America. On a Saturday morning, February 18th, long before visitors began arriving, Scott led Jumbo out of his stable, and the two headed towards the ramp leading up to the crate. But as they grew close, Jumbo dug his feet into the ground and refused to move. Do something, the circus agent shouted. The elephant ship was scheduled to set sail the next afternoon. Jumbo had to be bored, but Jumbo trumpeted his unhappiness. No amount of pushing-pulling could budge him. What could Scott do? It's quite impossible, he said to them, 7 tons of a stubborn elephant. They sent him back to the stable. At 5 a.m. the next morning, they tried again. Guess what? It was still dark when Scott led Jumbo from the elephant house. Around the side of the building, they trotted, the elephant good-naturedly flapping his ears. As they came to the side gate leading to the public road, Jumbo playfully knocked off Scott's bowler hat with his trunk. The agent's hope soared. The creature looked cooperative. The gate creaked open, and Scott and Jumbo moved onto the road, and then Jumbo stopped. He began moaning pitifully. Speaking to the elephant in soothing tones, Scott urged him on, but Jumbo just dropped to his huge knees. He let out a cry so mournful and loud it was heard on the other side of the zoo. Then he rolled over, and he grunted unhappily. People started shouting, "Let the elephant stay!" By late afternoon, the agents gave up. How were they going to get Jumbo on the ship? It would be 2 more weeks before another one sailed for America. But could Scott get that stubborn elephant to stand? The keeper gave a sharp whistle to the agent's surprise. Jumbo immediately clambered to his feet, ears flapping, and moved through the crowd, everybody cheering. Up until this point, zoo officials had kept the sale quiet. Had Jumbo obediently stepped into the crate, he would have been on his way to America before the public realized he was gone. But now the truth was out. And British citizens saw the elephant's refusal to leave jolly old England for the uncouth wilds of Yankee America as a patriotic act. "He's our natural treasure," said the London Times. "He must remain here." Seemingly overnight, citizens formed a movement to save Jumbo. Thousands of school children wrote to Barnum, begging him not to take their elephant. "I do not think the children of America can be so cruel as to wish to have Jumbo when it makes him so unhappy to leave England," wrote one little girl. Even Queen Victoria penned a letter asking the showman to reconsider, but Barnum refused. Mourned one London newspaper, "No more quiet garden strolls. Our amiable Jumbo must now dwell in a tent, take part in the routine of a circus, and instead of his friendly trots with British girls and boys, has to amuse a Yankee mob and put up with peanuts and waffles." The crowds descended on the zoo to say their goodbyes, and they brought gifts, cakes and jams, bouquets of flowers, cookies. One elderly lady arrived with 6 pounds of grapes, 4 pounds of raisins, and a fruit cake, all prettily wrapped up in a ribbon tied with her basket. Minutes later, she went away in a huff after Jumbo ignored the treats and he ate the basket instead. And a nurse, knowing that Jumbo faced a long ocean voyage, brought him a box of seasickness pills. Meanwhile, in the United States, excitement grew as the newspapers reported daily on all the drama surrounding him. Overnight, Jumbo mania struck. Shop windows suddenly filled with souvenirs, hats, earrings, Jumbo scarves, neckties, cigars, and bags. On the street, people could be heard humming the new hit tune, the Jumbo Polka. And in restaurants, diners had Jumbo stews, soups, pies, and ice cream. "America welcomes Jumbo with open arms," declared the New York Times. "If only the elephant would cooperate." The zoo officials blamed Scott. They suspected him of controlling Jumbo with secret hand signals. But why would Scott keep the elephant from entering the crate or command him to lie down the street? The reason was obvious. Scott had not been hired to be his keeper in America. "If you hire me," he told the circus agents, "I will get Jumbo into the box." Jumbo was once again led from the stable. He followed docilely along. He didn't dig his heels in or trumpet with fear. Instead, he plodded up the ramp into the crate, where he calmly munched a peck of apples while the workmen secured the doors. When the crate at last rolled through the zoo gate, the elephant harumphed. Then he held out his trunk to those who watched him go. There was something particularly human in this attitude. The next morning, he set sail for America, and at his side, sitting cross-legged on the hay-strewn floor of the crate, was his best friend, Matthew Scott. 18 days later, in 1882, his ship sailed into the harbor. Thousands waited at the dock to greet him. Once there, the blacksmith set to removing the iron bands from the box, and Jumbo was now free. But the elephant, who had been in a crate since leaving England, seemed unsure. Gingerly, he lowered a foot onto the auditorium floor, but quickly lifted it up as if the ground were hot, and he backed into the crate. "Be still, Jumbo," said Scott. "Easy, boy. Come on, Jummy." Cautiously, slowly, Jumbo moved out of the box. When all 4 feet were on the floor, he looked around at the circus with all the equipment. Then, trumpeted again, dropped to his knees, and rolled on his back. Joyfully, he waved his legs and trunk in the air for several minutes. And then he followed Scott to the elephant quarters. The other 31 pachyderms were all smaller. They stared at the sight of a big elephant like that. Mr. Jumbo marched along, saluting each elephant he came to. They seized each other's trunks, embraced, and all together showed delight at making a new friend. The same afternoon, people mobbed the circus ticket office. All the tickets were sold for that day. Barnum had not been planning on exhibiting the elephant for several more weeks. He wanted to give Jumbo and Scott time to settle into circus life. But with the crowds clamoring, and they were paying for a glimpse of Jumbo, he changed his mind. For the next 2 weeks, Jumbo made a very brief performance, a very brief appearance at every performance. The audience was thrilled. In the first 10 days, Jumbo brought an additional $300,000. He would bring in a total of $1.5 million in the first year. Circus didn't spend the whole time in New York City, so after 4 weeks, the circus packed up and went on a tour of the United States. A couple more pages here. Long story. Traveling by train, it crisscrossed the country in one of the 100 privately owned railroad cars. Everything the circus needed was crammed in. Costumes, cages, bleachers, posters, programs. The show's animals were also on board. Horses, the zebras, the giraffes, then the clowns, the acrobats. Only one performer traveled in his own personal railroad car, red with gold edging, the Jumbo Palace car, as it was called, 40 feet long, 13 feet tall. It was as big as the railroad company would allow. Any bigger, and it would not have fit under low bridges or through tunnels. Inside, there was a separate bed and bathroom for Scott. When asked why he didn't bunk with his fellow animal keepers, Scott replied, "I don't need anybody but Jummy." To make the most of its time, the circus traveled at night, arriving at its next stop early the following morning. And everyone, including the performers, worked to set up camp. The heaviest work was left to the animals. They lugged poles and dragged canvas. Only Jumbo was excused from this day. He would be too valuable to be put to work. He just stood watching. It didn't take long for Scott and Jumbo to fall into routine. Every day before the performance, Scott exercised, fed, and bathed Jumbo, filed his toenails, and rubbed lotion behind his ears. And he made sure to leave abundant time, as he delicately phrased it, for Jumbo to complete his business. African elephants produce up to 400 pounds of feces a day. Just the thought of Jumbo having an accident during the performance caused the circus owners to shudder. That would clear the tent in about 10 seconds. When the performance was over, Scott brought Jumbo back to the train, and before falling asleep, to the clickety-clack of the train, they always shared a bottle of beer. It was Jumbo's favorite beverage. One night, Scott forgot to give Jumbo his share, and no sooner had Scott drifted off to sleep than he felt Jumbo's strong trunk curl around his waist. And a second later, he was ripped from his blankets and hoisted high into the air. Only a promise to allow the whole court the next day saved my sleep. Sometimes sleeping with Jumbo could be dangerous. The brakes squealed and the cars lurched as the locomotive barely missed colliding with another train. In his palace car, Jumbo bellowed with fear. He was panicked. Once he pinned Scott against the wall. Scott began gasping for air, but Jumbo seemed to recognize the danger, and he pushed Scott away with his trunk. Jummy gave me such a squeeze that I don't want any more like it, he told the doctor. Scott was badly bruised. He spent the next 6 days in the infirmary, and for the first time in 16 years, Jumbo was without Scott. Unable to perform, moping about the circus grounds, the great elephant looked like a girl who had been left by her date. Scott had another close call later that season. He was standing with Jumbo waiting for the performance to start when he heard a noise like a bursting thunderstorm. Peeking around the curtain, he was horrified to see dozens of elephants stampeding towards him, smashing everything in their path. If death ever stared me in the face, said Scott, it did at that moment. On came this black mass of animals, and I thought there was no escape for being crushed. Guess what? Then Scott felt Jumbo's trunk wrap around his waist, and the elephant pulled him back, saved his life behind the curtains. With Jumbo acting as a barricade, the stampeding elephants came to a stop, and Scott was gently put down by Jumbo. For that season as well as the next week, Jumbo was the biggest star. Every night, the tent was capable of holding 20,000 people, was packed to overflowing. Please let me see Jumbo. I won't look at anything else. Dan sent loads of gifts too, boxes of chocolates, of fruit, hand-stitched quilts, and crocheted pillows, even a sewing machine. On April 30th, 1885, Jumbo left New York City for what was to be the last time. A crowd of thousands gathered. They threw flowers. Until next year, Jumbo. See you next season. That 1885 tour season was a long one. 80 different towns in 4 months. Philadelphia, Washington, Cincinnati, St. Louis, Chicago, Detroit, up across the Canadian border. They were so exhausted when the circus finally pulled into the quiet town of St. Thomas, Ontario, Canada. Jumbo waited behind the curtain for his cue. So far, the performance went off without a hitch. The elephants, the 31 Asian elephants, trotted into the center of the ring. They were shimmering in purple and gold sequins. They rose up and bounced on balls and formed a pyramid. Then Jumbo flapped his ears and the red curtain rose toward the ceiling. The mighty elephant at last appeared. Everyone began clapping, Jumbo, Jumbo, over here. He moved his head from side to side, swung his trunk, and he walked around the ring 3 times. That was all. He didn't need to balance a ball or wear a sequin. It was just enough to marvel at him. We love you, Jumbo. Hooray, Jumbo. He knelt and picked up one of the treats with his trunk. Brandishing it about, he acknowledged the crowd's generosity before popping it in his mouth. Behind Jumbo, there was a little elephant named Tom Thumb who scampered into the ring and he wore a pair of striped trousers and a top hat. He was the clown of all the elephants. With the crowd still cheering, Matthew led both Jumbo and Tom Thumb away from the tent along the railroad tracks towards the waiting circus cars. To the group's right stretched the Barnum and Bailey train. To their left, a steep embankment slipped off and sloped into a field. Sandwiched into this narrow space, the group now walked along 500 feet of track. Scott knew no trains were scheduled to use the track that night. The railway men had assured circus workers that it would be safe to walk along this stretch. Still, Scott felt uneasy. If a train did come along, there would be no way to escape. Suddenly, Scott heard the distant rumble of a locomotive. Realizing the danger, he struggled to turn the elephants left. But because they were afraid of the embankment, they refused to climb down it. Frantic now, the shrill whistle of the train directly behind them, Scott slapped Jumbo's flank hard. Turning the elephants around, he began running them back towards the end of the circus train. He hoped to reach its end and pass along the front in time. The oncoming train rounded a curve, its glaring yellow light blinding them, and panicked, Jumbo trumpeted. The engineer spotted the danger on the track, but he could do nothing to stop his locomotive. Hydraulic brakes had not been invented. All he could do was slam the train into reverse. And then there was a sickening thud as the train plowed into the elephants. It hit Tom Thumb first, scooping up the little pachyderm in its cow catcher and tossed him sideways. Tom Thumb screamed with pain. Jumbo was still running for his life when the train caught up to him a few minutes later. Because of his immense size, it was impossible for Jumbo to be thrown clear off the tracks. Instead, the train and the elephants skidded together. Scott, who managed to leap to safety at the last second, was unharmed, but Jumbo lay dying. Scrambling over the wreckage, Scott hurried to the elephant's side. The animal reached out its long trunk and wrapped it around the trainer and drew him down to where his majestic head lay in the cinders. Scott stroked Jumbo's face and murmured comforting words as the elephant drew one last shuddering breath, and then he was silenced. Scott sobbed uncontrollably. Barnum heard the news a few hours later. Poor Scott, he said. I don't know what he'll do without Jumbo. Still, the showman never let sentimentality interfere with business. He immediately sent a taxidermist to the accident site, saved Jumbo's skin and skeleton. Meanwhile, the circus workers had to move his body off the track. 100 men with ropes and poles heaved and pushed for almost an hour before they managed to tip the body of their greatest star onto the embankment. As the sun rose, news of the accident spread. People came to gape at his immense body. And so many souvenir hunters pulled hairs from his tail or chipped slivers of ivory from his tusk that a fence had to be built to protect him. All the while, Scott grieved beside his elephant. He didn't even seem to notice the commotion. For the first time in 20 years, he didn't feed, bathe, or play with his beloved Jummy. On the morning of September 17th, less than 36 hours after his death, a taxidermist arrived. He brought 2 assistants. As soon as he saw the massive corpse, he knew he was understaffed. So he hired 6 local butchers to carve up the carcass. Ward and his assistants began the preservation process. They scraped his skin and bones clean. And then they sent some of his tusks to the British Museum in London and the Smithsonian in DC. And casts made of his teeth showed at the time of his death he was still growing. After 3 days of work, the elephant skin and bones were ready to be moved to Ward's laboratory at the University of Rochester. They bleached his bones and put him back together. And now, at every performance, hide and skeleton were placed next to each other on a wagon. And the wagon was pulled around the big top. The elephants had been trained to carry gigantic black bordered handkerchiefs with their trunks and to stop every few minutes to dab at their eyes. Matthew Scott accompanied the remains of Jumbo, and after each performance, the keeper liked to stand there with people and talk about his pet. But the novelty soon faded, and guess what? Matthew Scott wondered, what will I do now? Barnum suggested that Scott return to the London Zoo, but he could not bring himself to take care of another animal. During the winter months, when the circus was at Bridgeport, Connecticut, the workers found him skulking around the elephant house. "What are you doing here?" And he said, "Well, I think about Jumbo, and I wanted to still talk to me." Sadly, Matthew Scott soon disappeared from the pages of history. He wasn't hanging around the circus anymore. Where did he go? Most historians believe he died around this time, but it remains a mystery. In 1890, Barnum decided to retire the double Jumbo, the one that had been created by the taxidermist, and he donated the skeleton to the American Museum of Natural History in New York City, where it is still periodically displayed. But it wasn't long before the stuffed elephant became the college's mascot at Tufts. Tufts sports teams are called the Jumbos. For the next 4 decades, before sporting events or big exams, students made their way to Barnum Hall, where the hide of Jumbo stood on display, and they would stick a coin in his trunk and pull on his tail. Wow. The tailless Jumbo continued to stand in Barnum Hall at Tufts for another 40 years, and then in 1979, a fire ripped through the museum and destroyed everything inside. But the elephant's most enduring legacy is his name. Within months of his arrival in the United States, the word Jumbo made its way. Oh.
Video enough, go ahead. Keep on.
Sadly, the tailless Jumbo, let's see. As for Jumbo's hide, it went to the Showman's Pet Project, the Barnum Museum at Tufts University in Medford, Massachusetts. He had founded the museum a few years earlier, after the Universalist Church established Tufts as its first college. Becoming one of its earliest benefactors, Barnum had given the place hundreds of specimens, artifacts, and collections. Now he added Jumbo to the list. It wasn't long before the stuffed elephant became the college's mascot. The tailless Jumbo continued to stand in Barnum Hall for another 40 years, and then in April 1975, like I read, the fire ripped through the museum and destroyed everything. Desperate to preserve something of their mascot, one of the museum's caretakers scooped several handfuls of the hide's ashy remains into an empty peanut butter jar, and he gave the jar to the school's athletic department. To this day, the team members rub the jar for good luck. You've got to believe these are Jumbo's ashes. He's in there somewhere. I can't tell you which molecule, but he's in there. But the most enduring legacy is his name. Within months of his arrival in the United States, the word Jumbo made its way into the English language. People began to use that word to mean big, really big. And so, in a way, Jumbo is still with us. The huge elephant is still with us. Jummy, as Scott once said, will never be forgotten. That's the story of Jumbo. And if you're interested in reading anything else about Jumbo and the Carmen Bailey Circus, this book is available for checkout, and then some bibliography. Of course, we don't do things like this with animals anymore. And I'm glad, because some of the things that Jumbo and the other elephants had to do, like dress up in costumes and toss balls around and be in a circus and live in a train car, are just not right. I mean, we know now, if you read anything by Jane Goodall, you know that elephants have feelings. In fact, I have a book that shows, and this is available at the library. It's called Elephants Can Paint Too. Ooh. And these are paintings that elephants do. Different things. Look at the flowers. The elephant did that. So that's a book, Elephants Can Paint Too, by Katya Arnold. It's a true story about an amazing class of elephants that are taught to become artists by amazing teachers. Yep, okay, that's our read aloud for this week. Thank you.